The restaurant was one of those cozy little places in Manhattan's West Village. Tiny tables, Edison bulbs dangling overhead, the kind of spot you could imagine seeing in a movie about couples falling in or out of love. The air carried the gentle clink of silverware and that special candlelit glow that makes everything feel a little warmer, a little more intimate than it really is. I remember thinking that maybe it would be the perfect place for a date night, a pause from our busy, hectic lives in New York City. Alex, my husband of almost 5 years, sat across from me, swirling his glass of Cabernet like he was already somewhere else in his head. He leaned back in his chair, gave me a half smile, and said, almost offhand, by the way, babe, I'll be gone next weekend. Corporate workshop in Chicago. Big client thing. Mandatory. He made it sound important, like it was just one of those things that came with his job. And honestly, I felt that same familiar wave of pride I always did when he talked about work. I'd always been his biggest supporter, the partner who didn't just listen, but wanted to be a part of his world. So, before I even thought about it, I blurted, do you need any help packing? Or maybe I could tag along, if spouses are allowed? I mean, Chicago in the fall. How bad could that be? My voice was light, maybe a little too hopeful. But the shift in his expression was instant. The air seemed to go tense. He set down his fork, just hovering in the air, and forced a tight smile. It's employees only. You wouldn't enjoy it anyway, he said, his tone flat, eyes dropping back to his plate as if the conversation was already over. I felt it immediately, a sting that didn't seem like it should matter, but did. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them. The finality. The quickness with which he shut the door on my suggestion. Like my presence wasn't just unnecessary, but actually unwelcome. I tried to shake it off, switched to talking about the weather, the wine, even a funny story about the barista at my office. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny unsettled feeling began to grow. See, I've never been the type of woman to spiral into wild suspicions. Trust had always been the anchor of our relationship, especially with how chaotic New York can be. If you can't trust your person here, you'll get swallowed up by the city. But that night, as we shared a chocolate lava cake and the last sips of wine, I couldn't stop replaying that moment. The words, you wouldn't enjoy it, looped in my mind like a subway announcement you just can't tune out. What did he mean by that? He knew I loved events. He'd seen me charm entire rooms of strangers, or work a business crowd as if I was born for it. We'd gone to a dozen of his company's parties together over the years. Not once had I felt out of place. If anything, sometimes I got the feeling his colleagues liked me more than him. After dinner, Alex hummed to himself as he washed the dishes. He acted like nothing about our earlier conversation had landed any differently for him. But I noticed, for the first time, the way he didn't look me in the eye, the way his shoulders were a little stiff as he loaded the plates into the dishwasher. Was I overthinking? Maybe. But sometimes your gut whispers to you before your brain can catch up. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I lay awake in the dark, listening to the sounds of the city through our bedroom window. Horns, sirens, distant laughter from the bar downstairs, the city's restless energy never letting up. I told myself to let it go. To trust him like I always had. To not become me that wife. But the seed had been planted, and it was already pushing roots down into the dark places of my mind. The next morning, the doubt hadn't faded. It felt sharper, somehow. Over coffee at our small kitchen table, I watched as Alex scrolled through his phone with rapid little flicks of his thumb, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he caught me looking, he flashed a quick smile, then flipped his phone over so the screen was facing down. Just a tiny gesture, something most people would never notice. But it was new for us. He used to share everything so openly. Why did it suddenly feel like there was a door closing between us? I tried again, asking, "So, what's the workshop going to be like? Who else will be there?" But Alex gave only the vaguest answers, brushing off my questions as if the details didn't matter. "Just the usual," he said, reaching for his travel mug. "Boring stuff. You'd hate it." He sounded calm, maybe too calm. There was a subtle edge in his voice, like a warning not to dig deeper. I smiled, pretended to believe every word, but inside, my mind was already busy, cataloguing each little inconsistency, every stray detail. Looking back, I didn't know it then, but that simple breakfast conversation would be the first thread I'd start to pull. And once you start tugging at a loose string, sometimes the whole sweater unravels. The next morning, after Alex left for the office, I sat at our kitchen table with a fresh cup of Colombian roast and my laptop open. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity. I wanted to understand why I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own marriage. But deep down, I already knew I was searching for answers, even if I was afraid of what I might find. It wasn't about being a jealous wife. It was about that gnawing, persistent feeling, the kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and won't let you fall back asleep. The city outside was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling down the street, the bodega on the corner raising its metal gate, a dog walker wrangling 6 leashes at once. All of it should have made me feel at home, but I felt a strange sense of isolation, as if I were observing everything from behind glass. I typed Alex's company name into Google, followed by a Chicago workshop, half expecting to find nothing. But there it was, right at the top. The company's own website, a big splashy banner advertising the event. And the kicker? The weekend workshop was open to the public. Even worse, there was a gala dinner on Saturday night, and the invitation specifically mentioned that spouses and partners were welcome. Right there in bold font, a "Bring Your Plus One." My stomach tightened. My fingers hovered over the mouse as I scrolled through smiling group photos from last year's event. There were familiar faces, Alex's colleagues, some with their wives and husbands on their arms, all beaming for the camera. I even spotted myself in the background of a shot from the year before, chatting with the CFO about travel. There was no way Alex didn't know about their +1 policy. There was no way his dismissal had been innocent. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold, my heart pounding loud enough to drown out the city noise. A dozen questions flooded my mind, but one rose above the rest. If Alex had lied about this, what else was he lying about? I could have confronted him then and there, sent him a text, demanded an explanation. But I didn't. Something held me back. I needed more. I wanted the truth, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I started clicking through every page I could find, the guest list, the event schedule, the promotional video with snippets of speeches and dance floor laughs. It all looked so open, so ordinary, so honest, which made Alex's secrecy feel all the more calculated. The more I read, the less sense his story made. Why had he been so quick to shut me down? Why act as if he was hiding me from his colleagues, when I'd always been part of his professional life before? There was no logical explanation, except for the one my heart didn't want to face. I decided then and there, I'd go to Chicago. Not as his guest, but on my own terms. I pictured the look on his face when he'd see me there, smiling, in the middle of the crowded hotel ballroom. Part of me hoped I'd catch him off guard, and he'd just laugh, pull me close, say he was planning to surprise me all along. But another part of me, the cautious, realistic part, feared I wouldn't like what I found. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled out my phone, booked a flight to Chicago, reserved a hotel room right across from the event venue, and added the details to my calendar. When the confirmation email landed in my inbox, it felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. This was a mission. That afternoon, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. I folded laundry, watered the little plant in the kitchen window, texted Alex a cheerful, "I hope your day's going well." All while my mind was racing with possibilities. I kept picturing that ballroom I'd seen online, polished wood floors, round tables draped in white linen, the soft clink of glasses and laughter, and somewhere in that room, my husband. Or maybe, or not. When Alex came home that evening, he was in a buoyant mood. He poured us both a glass of Pinot Grigio and launched into stories about a chaotic day at work. He looked relaxed, maybe even a little too relaxed. When he mentioned how exhausting a next weekend was going to be, I nodded, doing my best to look sympathetic, but I could feel myself slipping further into my own head. If I hadn't seen the workshop invitation with my own eyes, I might have believed every word. But now, I just smiled, letting him talk, wondering what was real and what was just another story. That night, lying in bed beside him as he snored softly, my plan felt even more certain. I would go. I would see for myself. No matter what I found, one thing was already clear. The weekend Alex had described to me didn't exist. The morning of the workshop arrived, and with it a restless energy I hadn't felt in years. I woke up before my alarm, heart beating a steady, anxious rhythm. As the sun crept through the blinds of our Brooklyn apartment, I moved quietly so I wouldn't wake Alex, who'd claimed he was flying out early for a team breakfast. He'd already packed his black roller bag the night before, barely letting me near it. Just work clothes. Nothing special, he'd said, shrugging off my questions. After he left, I stood in our small kitchen, sipping coffee and staring at the city skyline through the window. I tried to remind myself who I was, a strong, independent woman who'd built a life in the city, who wasn't afraid of a little uncertainty. But the truth was, I was terrified. Not of traveling alone, not of showing up somewhere I wasn't expected, but of the answers I might find. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't losing someone. It's realizing you already have. I dressed carefully, choosing a deep emerald dress that always made me feel confident. I brushed my hair until it shone, applied my makeup with steady hands, then slipped on my favorite heels, the ones that made a satisfying click against the floor, like I owned every room I entered. I took one last look in the mirror. I looked calm, but underneath, my nerves felt like live wires. The city was just waking up as my cab took me to LaGuardia. On the drive, I watched the skyline fade behind me, the buildings giving way to highways, my mind racing with every possible scenario. What if Alex really was just protecting me from a boring weekend? What if I was overreacting? But the other side of me, the one that felt every subtle change in his behavior, knew better. At the airport, everything felt like moving in slow motion. Security lines, the smell of coffee, the buzz of people heading somewhere, anywhere. I sat at the gate, scrolling through photos on my phone. Alex and I on vacation in Cape Cod, laughing in Central Park, hosting dinner parties for friends in our tiny apartment. It all felt like memories from another life. I wondered when exactly things had started to change. The flight to Chicago was short and uneventful. I stared out the window at the checkerboard fields below, trying not to think about what I'd say or do if I found Alex with someone else. By the time we landed, I felt like I'd lived 1,000 lifetimes inside my head. Chicago in October was crisp and bright. The air had that Midwestern snap, the kind that wakes you up and reminds you you're far from home. My hotel was right across from the event venue, a tall glass building downtown, the kind with a doorman and endless rows of taxis outside. I checked in under my own name, not caring who saw it. Inside the lobby, people were milling around in business attire, groups laughing over coffee, a woman balancing a laptop and a phone, two men in suits shaking hands like they just closed the deal of the year. I took a deep breath, checked my lipstick in the gleaming elevator doors, and followed the signs toward the conference center. The closer I got, the more my confidence returned. I was doing this for myself, for the woman who deserved the truth. I gave my name at the registration table and was handed a glossy folder with the workshop's logo on the front. No questions asked. My heart lifted. Maybe, just maybe, things would make sense again. I walked into the ballroom, scanning the sea of round tables, the white linen cloths, the little vases of sunflowers and baby's breath. I searched for Alex's familiar face, for the slightly messy hair and shy smile I'd fallen in love with. But there was no sign of him. Not at the coffee station, not near the stage, not anywhere. I made a slow circuit of the room, pretending to study the schedule. My chest tightened with every step. People were settling in, flipping through the folders, laughing, greeting one another with hugs and high fives. The place was alive with possibility. But Alex wasn't there. Finally, I approached one of the event coordinators, a woman in a navy blazer, holding an iPad. I put on my best wife of an executive smile. Hi, excuse me, could you tell me if Alex Parker is registered? He's my husband. I'm just not seeing him. She scrolled through her list, her nails clicking softly on the screen. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name registered for this workshop. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt sideways. The lights were too bright, the air too thin. I thanked her, trying to keep my smile in place as I backed away. My heels echoed like a clock ticking down to some invisible deadline. This wasn't about Alex being late. He was never coming. I left the ballroom as gracefully as I could manage, the plush carpet muffling my hurried steps. Out in the hallway, I leaned against the cool marble wall and closed my eyes, trying to catch my breath. The chatter and laughter of the conference drifted out from behind the doors, but it sounded distant, like something happening on the other side of a thick pane of glass. For a moment I stood there, feeling the weight of uncertainty settle on my shoulders. My mind raced. If Alex wasn't here, then where was he? What could possibly be so important, or so shameful, that he'd invent a story about a work event and travel all the way to Chicago to keep it hidden? I didn't have answers, but I did have my phone. Almost on autopilot, I scrolled through my contacts and found one of Alex's colleagues, someone I barely knew, Melissa, a woman I'd met at last year's company holiday party. We'd chatted over cocktails about everything from yoga studios to Broadway shows. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before I finally pressed it. She picked up on the third ring, her voice as cheerful as ever. Hey, Claire. What's up? I kept my tone casual. Hey, Melissa. Quick question, just curious, is Alex having fun at the workshop this weekend? I heard it was supposed to be a big deal. There was a pause, and then a small, almost surprised laugh. "Oh, I thought he was taking a long weekend? I didn't even realize he was in Chicago. Isn't he away with... Well, never mind, I probably got it wrong." With that, my stomach dropped, and the last thread of hope snapped. Melissa didn't sound suspicious, just a little confused, as if she was hearing my story for the first time and realizing something didn't add up. I thanked her quickly and ended the call, but her words echoed in my mind as I drifted out of the hotel and onto the sunlit sidewalk. The city was alive with weekend energy, honking taxis, street vendors selling pretzels, kids running with balloons. I stood there, clutching my purse like it might hold the answers, my thoughts tumbling over themselves. I had no proof, nothing that couldn't be explained away if Alex tried hard enough. But the pieces were starting to arrange themselves into a picture that made my heart twist. If he wasn't here, who was worth lying for? And where had he really gone? The afternoon sun felt too bright, almost mocking. I wandered through downtown Chicago, passing shining skyscrapers and the familiar green of Millennium Park. The city, which had always felt so full of promise, now seemed cold and anonymous. I stopped to watch a street musician playing blues guitar, the notes trailing off into the wind. His case was open, filled with a handful of bills and coins, but I barely registered it. I was somewhere else entirely, trapped in a loop of worry and regret. For a few minutes, I considered calling Alex right then and there, demanding the truth, letting my anger and heartbreak spill out over the phone. But I held back. I knew that if I confronted him now, without anything solid, he'd twist the truth until I didn't know which way was up. He was good at that, turning arguments into confusion, turning concern into overreaction. I needed more. I needed proof. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I walked the riverfront, bought a coffee I couldn't taste, and eventually made my way back to my hotel room. The bed felt too big, the city lights outside my window too harsh. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every conversation, every detail of the past few weeks. All those little things I'd brushed aside, the late nights, the secretive texts, the nervous energy when he thought I was watching. It all fit together now, each moment a clue I hadn't wanted to see. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of traffic from the street below. I imagined Alex wherever he was, maybe laughing with someone, maybe hiding in plain sight. I wondered if he was thinking about me at all, or if his new reality had already started to erase me from the picture. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. I would have my answers, one way or another. The next morning, I booked an early flight back to New York. I packed my bag slowly, folding my dress with care, as if by treating it gently I could somehow protect the person I'd been when I'd chosen it, the optimistic, trusting woman who believed her marriage was unbreakable. At the airport, surrounded by crowds and the familiar scent of bad coffee and jet fuel, I felt invisible. I realized how easy it was for secrets to hide in plain sight, for the people closest to us to slip through the cracks of our everyday routines. The flight was bumpy, and I spent most of it staring at the seat bark in front of me, my thoughts swirling like the clouds outside the window. When I finally landed at LaGuardia and rode the taxi home through the early morning traffic, everything looked different. The city I loved, the city where Alex and I had built our lives together, felt like a stage set after the play had ended. The actors were gone, the lights dimmed, and all that was left was silence. I unlocked the door to our apartment and stood in the hallway for a long moment, the sounds of the building, a dog barking down the hall, a neighbor's TV, reminding me I was really back. I set my suitcase down and stared at the living room, at the framed photos, the books on the shelves, the little reminders of a life I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. I knew what I had to do. I was done waiting for Alex to reveal his truth. If I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. That first evening back in New York, I waited for Alex in our living room, the lamp casting a soft golden glow over the hardwood floors. My coat was draped neatly over the arm of the couch, my purse beside my keys on the coffee table, everything arranged to look as normal as possible, as if I'd just come back from errands or an afternoon with friends. But inside, I felt like a performer waiting for her cue. My hands were folded tightly in my lap, every muscle tense. The city outside was settling into its nighttime rhythm, the distant wail of a siren, the laughter from a bar down the block, the endless pulse of traffic on Atlantic Avenue. I tried to let the sounds soothe me, to remind myself that no matter what happened, the world would keep turning. When I finally heard Alex's car pull into the driveway, my heart skipped. I counted his steps as he climbed the stairs, the click of his shoes on the tile, the familiar scrape of his keys in the lock. The door swung open and he stepped inside, tired but smiling faintly, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He set it down and walked over to me, leaning in for a quick kiss on the cheek. "Hey, you're home early," he said, voice casual, maybe a little too smooth. I let him kiss me, but pulled back just enough for him to notice. "Where were you today?" My voice was soft, controlled. "Because you weren't at that workshop." Alex's smile faltered for half a second, the tiniest flicker, before he recovered. He gave a light laugh, shaking his head. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I was. Maybe you missed me." He tried to make it sound like a joke, like the idea of me questioning him was ridiculous. But I didn't drop my gaze. I didn't smile. "Don't lie to me, Alex." He let out a sharp sigh, running a hand through his hair, an old habit whenever he felt cornered. "Claire, you're overreacting. You always do this. I told you, it was just a boring work thing. Why are you making a big deal out of nothing?" His words stung. He knew exactly where to aim to hurt me, by making me question my own instincts, my own sense of reality. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, eyes locked on his. "I spoke to someone at the event. They don't even have you registered, Alex. So I'll ask again, where were you?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might finally tell me the truth. But then his face changed, shifting into that frustrating mix of defensiveness and mockery. "So now you're checking up on me? That's cute." His words hit like a slap, but I refused to let myself flinch. If there was someone else, I needed to know. My voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "If you're seeing someone, just say it." The effect was immediate. His eyes flashed with anger. "There's no one else," he snapped, louder now, as if he could scare the question away with volume alone. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't hide well behind a raised voice. I saw it anyway, the guilt, the flicker in his eyes. I stayed silent, letting the pores grow heavy between us, until he shifted his weight and glanced toward the door. "Then why won't you look me in the eye and answer?" I pressed, voice soft but unyielding. He rubbed the back of his neck, muttering something about not needing to explain every little detail of his day. It was all the confirmation I needed, not in words, but in the way he couldn't meet my gaze. Finally, he snatched his keys back off the table and mumbled about needing some air, about how the walls were closing in on him. He didn't slam the door, but the sound of it shutting was sharp and final. For a long time after he left, I just sat there, the faint trace of his cologne hanging in the room, my hands folded and cold. I realized then that this wasn't about suspicions anymore. It was about proof. And once I had it, there wouldn't be anywhere left for him to hide. The days that followed blurred together. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just watched. Every bank notification, every stray receipt in his coat pocket, every odd text alert that lit up his phone became a piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. It didn't take long. Alex wasn't careful anymore, or maybe he just underestimated me. I found hotel charges on our joint account that didn't match his story. A dinner for two at a romantic Italian place in Midtown. An Uber receipt that ended not at a conference center, but at a brownstone in Park Slope, registered to a name I didn't recognize, Erica Klein. My hands shook as I printed out the evidence, every page a little heavier than the last. But instead of despair, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm you get when a storm has finally blown itself out, leaving only clear skies and the mess to clean up. I was done keeping his secrets. I was done pretending not to see. It was time for Alex to face the truth, not just with me, but with everyone who believed his stories. I spent the next few days gathering everything: receipts, digital statements, screenshots of text conversations, even the Uber drop-off map with that unfamiliar brownstone circled in red. I watched Alex's routine with the sharp attention of a detective, noting every time he left the apartment for work drinks or came home later than usual, smelling of aftershave and faint perfume that wasn't mine. Each night, after he went to sleep, I sat at our kitchen table and pieced together the puzzle. I highlighted dates, cross-checked times, and jotted down names that had appeared in our shared calendar but never in conversation. By the end of the week, the evidence was undeniable, a paper trail of lies, a constellation of moments where Alex had slipped quietly out of our marriage and into another life. Strangely, I didn't feel angry anymore. The rage I'd expected to feel was replaced by a heavy, cool sadness. It was like standing at the end of a dock, watching a boat drift away, knowing there was nothing left to tether it to shore. But along with the sadness came a clarity I hadn't known I needed. The truth wasn't just about Alex's betrayal. It was about reclaiming my own voice, my own sense of reality. I decided that if Alex was going to hide, I would make sure there was nowhere left for him to run, not in our marriage, not in the eyes of his family, and certainly not in his carefully crafted image of himself as a devoted husband. No more secrets. No more quiet suffering. I arranged a family dinner for the night Alex was due back from another supposed off-site meeting. I invited his parents, his sister Megan and her husband, and even his favorite cousin who lived in Jersey City. I told everyone it was a celebration. Alex had closed a big deal, I said, and wanted to share the good news. The night of the dinner, I set the table with our best dishes and opened a bottle of Merlot we'd been saving for a special occasion. My hands were steady as I placed the stack of evidence in a plain folder at my seat. The apartment filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses as everyone arrived, hugging and catching up, complimenting the food, making small talk about the Yankees' latest loss. When Alex finally walked through the door, his smile froze for just a moment as he saw the full table. He hesitated in the entryway, then forced a casual laugh. "Why, what's all this?" He hung his coat by the door and tried to look at ease, but I could see the nerves in the way his eyes darted from face to face. I stood, folder in hand, and gestured to the empty chair beside me. "Sit down, Alex. We've been waiting for you." The room fell silent, everyone watching as he took his seat. I slid the folder across the table, the papers fanning out enough to reveal bold headers: hotel invoices, restaurant receipts, the Uber log, and Erica Klein's name. His mother's fork froze in mid-air. His father set down his glass with a quiet clink. Megan's gaze bounced from me to Alex and back, confusion written plainly across her face. "Your workshop in Chicago sounded amazing," I said, voice steady and even. "Especially the part where you didn't go." For a moment, Alex said nothing. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to find his footing. "Claire, can we talk about this privately?" I shook my head. "No. Not this time." The silence in the room felt almost physical, a wall none of us could escape. His family watched, unsure if they were witnessing a fight or an unraveling. Before Alex could try another excuse, his phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with an email notification. HR notification, report filed. He reached for it, but then stopped, his hand hovering uncertainly, as if touching it would make everything real. I rose, slipping my coat on with slow, deliberate movements. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "I won't waste anyone's time pretending this can be fixed. Alex, you can explain it to them." I nodded toward his family, their eyes wide with shock and disappointment. With my bag over my shoulder, I walked to the door. Each step felt lighter than the last. The apartment, once filled with memories and laughter, now seemed small, too tight to contain the truth any longer. Outside, the air was cool and brisk. My car waited at the curb, already packed for a trip I'd planned in silence. I didn't look back as I slid behind the wheel. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. As the city lights blurred past my window, I realized that I was finally free, not just from Alex's lies, but from the invisible prison I'd built around myself out of hope and denial. I didn't know what the future would look like. I only knew it would belong to me. The drive away from our brownstone felt like leaving a different life behind. I didn't cry. Not then, not as I crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, watching the city lights shimmer on the East River. Instead, I let my mind wander to what would come next. I tried to remember who I had been before Alex, the version of Claire who chased sunrise runs in Prospect Park, who lost herself in books at tiny Soho cafes, who once dreamed of living fearlessly in the city she loved. That first night alone, I stayed at a small hotel in the West Village, a place I'd always admired for its vine-covered brick and window boxes overflowing with late autumn pansies. My room was small but warm, with creaky wooden floors and a view of a quiet courtyard. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. My phone buzzed with a flood of missed calls and texts. Alex, his mother, even Megan. I silenced it, set it face down, and let the silence wrap around me. In the morning, I woke to the distant rumble of delivery trucks and the aroma of coffee drifting up from the bakery downstairs. For a few precious seconds, I forgot everything that had happened. I just lay there, listening to the city's heartbeat, letting it remind me I was still here, still alive, still myself. I spent the next days moving through the city like a ghost, revisiting old haunts, my favorite bench in Washington Square Park, the bookstore with the impossibly tall shelves in Chelsea, the pier where Alex had once proposed. The memories stung, but they also felt strangely liberating, as if by retracing my steps, I could reclaim a piece of myself. I started talking, too. To my sister over the phone, to my oldest friend Lisa, who met me for dinner and never once asked why or how but just listened, letting me pour it all out. I told her everything: the workshop, the lies, the dinner, the final confrontation. I cried into my napkin, and then we both laughed, the kind of laughter that feels like oxygen after too long underwater. You know, Elisa said, squeezing my hand, it doesn't matter how perfect things looked from the outside. You trusted yourself enough to face the truth. That takes guts. I smiled, a real smile for the first time in weeks. Maybe. Or maybe I just ran out of excuses. At night, when sleep wouldn't come, I made lists. Not of regrets, but of possibilities. Places I wanted to travel. Books I'd never finished. Art classes I'd always meant to take but never found time for. I wasn't sure what shape my life would take now, but for the first time, I was excited to find out. I met with a divorce lawyer, a woman named Olivia who wore red-framed glasses and had the direct, steady manner of someone who'd seen every kind of heartbreak. She listened carefully, nodding, asking the right questions. She didn't promise it would be easy, but she did promise I would get through it. You're not the first woman in New York to lose her husband and find herself, as she said with a wry smile. You won't be the last. I found a small, sunlit apartment in Carroll Gardens, a walk-up on the top floor of a brownstone with a view of tree-lined streets. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night I spent there, I unpacked just one suitcase, hung a single-framed photo of my parents, and let the quiet settle in. It felt strange at first. No Alex, no double sinks, no lingering scent of his aftershave in the hallway. Just me, alone, unfiltered. I began to rediscover the things I loved. I started running again, letting the city wake up around me as I jogged past brownstones and corner delis, the air sharp and cold in my lungs. I went to art exhibits by myself, lingered over pastries in hidden bakeries, filled my evenings with novels and old jazz records. Each day, the ache of betrayal softened just a little bit more, replaced by something like hope. There were hard days, too. Days when the loneliness felt like a physical ache, when I wanted to call Alex if only to fill the silence. But even on those days, I reminded myself that I'd chosen this new beginning. I was learning. Slowly, that heartbreak could be a door instead of a dead end. One Sunday, I found myself standing on the Brooklyn Promenade, staring out at the Statue of Liberty. The sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. I closed my eyes and made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let this story end in bitterness or regret. That I would build something new, something just for me. I pulled out my phone and opened a fresh note. At the top, I typed, "A workshop for one." It made me smile. My own private journey. My own lessons. My own freedom.